Hello everybody and welcome to History Bite number 221, dated April 1st, 2021. I'm Walter, your mobile historian and blue-collar scholar. This History Bite is entitled How the United States Acquired Puerto Rico. Now, for the purposes of time saving, I will be referencing the island as PR several times throughout this video. Okay? So, everyone knows that Puerto Rico is one of America's most prized possessions. Indeed, the island, as of the time of this recording, has been under the administration of the United States of America for now going on 123 years. They have been times of hills and valleys, high points, low points, ups and downs. Okay, I think you get the picture. American administration of the island has been controversial at some points, but it is what it is. And while most people know that the U.S. controls Puerto Rico, most people don't know just how the heck we got the island in the first place. Well, it all began roughly around the 1870s and 80s when the United States, seeking a coaling and refueling station for its ships, began to take a true interest in the island of Puerto Rico, just as much as it had previously taken an interest in Cuba. That was something they never quite gave up. I mean, the U.S. had wanted to add Cuba to its, nation since the 1840s, arguably. All right, Cuba was always, something we coveted from the Spanish. All right. And Puerto Rico, though, however, was not exactly prized at first, but like I said, by the 1870s and 80s, the island certainly had gained the interest of the U.S. military as well as U.S. policymakers, all right? The U.S. offered to buy both Cuba and Puerto Rico from Spain for as much as $160 million, substantially more in that period of time, all right, roughly around the 1880s, but Spain wasn't interested in selling. Talk about a case of failing to acknowledge reality. The Spanish Empire was all but dead at this point anyway, and Spain was not about to give up the last true prize holdings of its empire, Cuba and PR, to the United States of America, lest they increase America's power to the disadvantage of their own. Okay? So as the U.S. normally works, it began making preparations, slowly but surely, for a war with Spain to take Puerto Rico and Cuba by force, which is ultimately what happened in the Spanish-American War. Now, before we get to that, though, anybody see this similar to a previous situation? You guessed it. This is exactly the same thing that happened 50 years earlier with Mexico, when we wanted to buy a large tract of their land, and the Mexicans said, "No, sir, we're not selling you our territory." So what did the U.S. do? Provoke a war. Indeed, and this is essentially what we did with the Spanish. All right, of course, you already know. The U.S., when it wants, is going to get it one way or another. All right, think of it like we can do it the easy way or we can do it the hard way. But either way, this is going to happen. That's what happened with Mexico. That's what happened with Spain. All right, but for the record, the war with Spain was much easier than the war with Mexico. Okay, so of course we know about the explosion of the battleship Maine in Havana Harbor. Okay, this was an American ship that was docked there, that met the fate of a horrible explosion. All right, and the U.S. obviously pointed the finger at one party. Spain, you did this. Now get out of Cuba. Spanish said, "Micas." Okay? So, as a result, they broke off diplomatic relations with the U.S., and shortly thereafter, they declared war. This was followed soon thereafter by an American declaration of war, okay? And enter the Spanish-American War, folks. A very short but tense conflict in the spring into the early summer of 1898, okay? Now, with the Spanish-American War, which began in April of 1898, 2 months after the explosion of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor. The U.S. had the objectives of primarily taking Cuba and Puerto Rico, obviously its most prized and coveted regions, all right? And the Philippines were also certainly in play in the eyes of U.S. policymakers, all right? So with respect to, we'll get into the Spanish-American War in heavy detail in another video. But with respect to the Spanish-American War in Puerto Rico, all right, U.S. forces, all right, began the Puerto Rico campaign in May of 1898, which began with a bombardment of San Juan, all right. 2 months later, this was followed in July 1898 with a land invasion of Puerto Rico, resulting in several fierce battles on the island between Spanish and American forces, okay. All hostilities were officially called off in August of 1898 when the Spanish essentially relinquished control of the island to the United States. This was further reinforced with the Treaty of Paris in 1898. Okay, so in August of 1898, the President of the United States and the French ambassador, who was acting on behalf of the Spanish government, signed a provisional armistice where Spain said, all right, we're giving up Puerto Rico to the U.S., all right? And in December of 1898, when the Treaty of Paris, ending the Spanish-American War, was signed, Spain formally ceded the island to the United States of America. And at that point, Puerto Rico became an American possession, no longer under the sovereignty of Spain, now as said by the Treaty of Paris, 1898. All right? The Treaty of Paris was formally ratified in April of 1899 by the Spanish government, having been previously accepted by the U.S. government. And with the Treaty of Paris of 1898, the U.S. officially became a world power. Spain, however, lost the remaining parts of its American empire, Cuba and Puerto Rico, as well as Guam and the Philippines, all to the United States of America. Indeed, the Spanish-American War brought the final end to an already dying Spanish empire, all right? And like I said, this was the conflict which put the U.S. on the world stage, okay? It basically brought about the U.S. we have today, all right? So that is how the U.S. got Puerto Rico. Now, after the island came under American control, the first essential governor of the island assumed the position in October of 1898. The U.S. flag flew over the capital city of San Juan, all right? Although it had been raised before that with the installation of the first U.S. governor. At that point, the raising of the flag took a certain significance that it previously did not have, okay? I'll also add that the Treaty of Paris of 1898 was the first direct treaty between the U.S. and Spain since the Adams-Onis Treaty was signed with the Spanish some 80 years earlier in 1819. That treaty, of course, involved the acquisition of what is now the state of Florida from the Spanish. Okay, so after the U.S. took control of the island, they began numerous attempts to Americanize the Puerto Rican peoples, and that was not met with widespread approval. Indeed, the U.S. government did not look favorably upon the Puerto Rican people and seemed to do everything they can to destroy their heritage and culture and systems, as it were, at the time period. So, realizing that a lot of these efforts were futile, they figured we might as well just do what we can, okay, and get some use while rebuilding the island's damaged infrastructure from the Spanish-American War, all right? So in 1917, people of Puerto Rico PR became American citizens. That was largely so that they could be drafted to serve in World War I. Okay, it's always a motive, a deeply rooted motive with the U.S. Trust me. All right, and not long afterwards, after the signing of the Paris Peace Treaty, the U.S. attempted to, they actually did change the name of the island from Puerto Rico to Puerto Rico, making it easier to pronounce for some. But the island's name was changed back to Puerto Rico in the 1930s. And at that point, the island was officially integrated into the U.S. currency system when the U.S. dollar became its official currency. Okay? Before that, it was the Puerto Rican peso. All right? So the U.S. certainly, during this time period, did a great deal in restoring the island's sugar industry and rebuilding a lot of that damaged infrastructure. Okay? So our interest in Puerto Rico was primarily, like always, economic. All right? U.S. had very little interest in the general benefit and welfare of the islanders, per se. So that's how it is most of the time. So heading further down the line, in 1947, Puerto Ricans were finally given a degree of home rule and being able to elect their own governor, something that was done for the first time in 1948. And in 1952, all right, the island itself adopted a formal constitution and became known as the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. All right, giving the island a tremendous amount of control over its own affairs while still remaining an American possession. They have one non-voting delegate in the U.S. Congress, for the record. All right, so this is what Puerto Rico has today. All right. And the island has had more than one referendum on statehood independence or to remain as a commonwealth. Most referendums have suggested that the people desire to remain a commonwealth, but the most recent referendum in 2017, overwhelming amount of people voted for statehood. Now, how true and accurate those results were, we don't know. But I personally believe that whatever the future of Puerto Rico should be exclusively determined by the people of that island. All right? So that, ladies and gentlemen, is how the United States acquired the island of Puerto Rico. All right? Otherwise known as PR. All right? If you have any questions whatsoever about this or the island of Puerto Rico and its current standing with the U.S., all right, as a commonwealth, all right, a loose associated free state, having control over its own affairs, but still a part of America. Leave your questions and controversies down below, and I'll be happy to answer them. If you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do so now. It would greatly be appreciated. And if you'd like to donate financially to my channel, links are provided. Take care, stay safe out there, and I'll talk to you at the next bite. Peace.